So, Ukraine and Russia were probably the most heated focal point in the debate between Trump and Harris, especially when it concerned the war, U.S. support for Ukraine, and Trump's relationship with authoritarian leaders like Vladimir Putin, Viktor Orban, and even Kim Jong un. He even mentioned the Taliban at one point, but I'll get to that in the Afghanistan discussion. Now, Trump's position on the war was somewhat muddled. He sidestepped answering a direct question when asked if he wanted Ukraine to win the war against Russia, which, as per usual, is very suspicious because it is absolutely in the interest of the United States to assist Ukraine with victory, and this is a bipartisan opinion. Instead, Trump emphasized that his main goal was to stop the war, claiming he could settle the conflict before he even took office if re-elected. He offered no specifics on how he would achieve this, simply stating that he would speak to one and then speak to the other, referring to Putin and Zelensky, and resolve it quickly. This vague promise echoed his earlier claims that the war would never have started if he had been president. Now, as with the China discussion, Trump repeatedly asserted that he is more respected by world leaders than either Biden or Harris, stating that both Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin respect him. He used this to imply that his diplomatic style would be more effective in ending the war, suggesting that world leaders, including Putin, were afraid of him and that this kept them in check during his presidency. Trump even invoked the support of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who's an ally of Putin, to bolster this argument. Orban, who maintains close ties with Moscow and has blocked European efforts to support Ukraine, has visited Trump in Florida twice this year. Trump quoted Orban as saying that global instability is a result of Trump's absence from the White House. According to Trump, Orban and other autocratic leaders believe that Russia, China, and North Korea feared him and that his leadership kept these nations in line. Harris, in response, directly attacked Trump's refusal to condemn Putin as well as his long history of praising the Russian leader. Harris stated that Trump's plan to, quote, settle the war likely involved giving up and conceding to Russia. She said, quote, if Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now, end quote. She also went on to say that Trump would likely abandon U.S. allies in Europe, quote, for the sake of favor from dictators like Putin. She hit especially hard when talking about the 800,000 people of Polish descent in Pennsylvania watching as Trump waffled back and forth on his support for Ukraine, NATO, Russia, etc. Harris suggested that Trump's relationship with autocratic leaders such as Putin and Kim Jong un and Orban demonstrated his susceptibility to manipulation. And honestly, if you've been watching the news about the recent conservative pundits that have been tied to Russian propaganda via Tenet Media, there is some truth to that. Harris argued that these dictators are eager for Trump to return to the White House because they believe they can easily influence him. Harris said that Trump would give up on American values and U.S. allies, quote, in exchange for favor from a dictator who would eat you for lunch, end quote. Now, throughout the debate, Trump did not directly address the nature of his relationships with authoritarian leaders, but defended his connections with Putin and Orban as a sign of respect, suggesting that their fear of him kept them in line. His refusal to directly condemn Putin or take a clear stance on whether Ukraine should win the war was consistent with past approaches, where he has praised Putin's leadership and avoided strong criticism of Russia's invasion. As such, Harris adeptly tied Trump's reluctance to criticize Russia and Putin to a broader pattern of behavior where he has cozied up with authoritarian leaders. She framed this as dangerous for U.S. national security and global stability, arguing that Trump's admiration for autocrats like Putin would embolden these leaders and make the world less safe. Now, Trump criticized the Biden administration for the amount of aid sent to Ukraine, arguing that the U.S. has borne too much of the financial burden compared to European allies. He claimed that Europe is not contributing enough to Ukraine's defense by inaccurately saying that the U.S. has spent vastly more on Ukraine than European countries. In reality, while the U.S. has provided significant aid, European nations collectively have contributed even more, particularly when considering military, humanitarian, and financial aid as tracked by the Kiel Institute. According to them, the U.S. has sent about $75 billion to Ukraine, with another $23 billion to be allocated, while Europe has sent $110 billion, with another $77 billion to be allocated. Harris underscored her own record and the Biden administration's ongoing support for Ukraine. She mentioned her diplomatic efforts before the war, including meeting with Zelensky at the Munich Security Conference in February of 2022, where she conveyed U.S. intelligence assessments warning of Russia's imminent invasion. Harris highlighted the Biden administration's military support for Ukraine, including providing providing defense systems like javelins, artillery, and tanks, which have enabled Ukraine to remain free and independent. Now, while Harris reaffirmed the Biden administration's current policy of providing military aid to Ukraine, she did not offer a specific look forward. She did not clarify whether she would change the level of support or alter strategies regarding the use of long-range weapons by Ukraine to strike deep into Russian territory, a topic of ongoing debate in Washington even today, as there are high-level discussions of potentially allowing that to take place. Now, Harris emphasized that U.S. support for Ukraine is about defending democracy against authoritarianism and ensuring that the aggression seen in Ukraine does not spread to other parts of Europe or beyond. She suggests that Trump's foreign policy approach would erode these principles, leaving the U.S. weaker on the global stage. With regard to Ukraine, Trump positioned himself as the candidate who could quickly end the war in Ukraine, emphasizing his strong relationship with world leaders, including Putin, and his perceived ability to strike a deal. However, his vagueness on the specifics of how he would do that and continued praise of authoritarian leaders like Putin raises serious concerns about what that deal would entail. Harris, on the other hand, portrayed Trump as dangerously weak in the face of autocrats, accusing him of potentially ceding Ukraine and U.S. allies to Russian aggression. She highlighted the Biden administration's record of rallying international support for Ukraine and providing critical military aid, arguing that U.S. support for Ukraine is essential for defending democracy globally. There is obviously a major contrast between what Trump and Harris see as the final outcome of this war in Ukraine. Trump focuses on personal diplomacy and perceived respect from leaders, while Harris emphasizes U.S. alliances, democratic values, and long-term strategic interests. Trump's approach is very much in line with that of a respected authoritarian leader coming to the table with other authoritarian leaders and hashing it out and parsing up territory, while Harris's approach aligns more with the traditional principles of the U.S. and its allies.